One of the best leadership lessons I ever learned came from a mentor many years ago. The lesson was simple. Inspect what you expect. Now, every time I say that, somebody eventually says the same thing. That sounds like micromanagement. I don't believe that's true. In fact, I think one of the biggest leadership mistakes people make is confusing accountability with micromanagement. Those are not the same thing. Micromanagement is controlling every detail. Micromanagement is standing over people's shoulders. Micromanagement is refusing to trust people to do their jobs. That's not leadership. Leadership starts with expectations. Clear expectations. Not assumptions. Not vague instructions. Not hoping people know what you mean. Clear expectations. What needs to be accomplished? When does it need to be done? What does success look like? What standards are expected? What support is available? That's where leadership begins. But that's also where many leaders stop. They communicate an expectation once and then disappear. Weeks later, they're frustrated because the outcome didn't match what they envisioned. The question I always ask is simple. Did you inspect what you expected? Because if something is important enough to expect, it should be important enough to follow up on. Not because you don't trust people, because leadership requires engagement, because leadership requires visibility, because leadership requires accountability. I've spent my career leading warehouse operations, implementation teams, consulting organizations, and business initiatives. One thing I've learned is that problems rarely appear overnight. They develop gradually. A misunderstanding, a missed deadline, an unresolved issue. A conversation that never happened, a risk that nobody followed up on, a concern that nobody addressed. Eventually, the small issues become major problems. Then everyone wonders what happened. What happened is simple. Nobody inspected what they expected. Good leaders don't wait for failure. They create visibility before failure occurs. They ask questions, they stay engaged, they remove obstacles, they provide support, they verify progress. That's not micromanagement. That's leadership. There's another leadership lesson that has stayed with me. Lou Holtz once said, "Praise loudly, criticize softly." I have always believed that is one of the most powerful leadership principles I've ever heard. Because leadership is not just about accountability. Leadership is about people. When somebody does great work, tell them. When somebody exceeds expectations, recognize it. When somebody contributes to the team, celebrate it, and don't do it quietly. Do it publicly. Too many leaders only speak up when something goes wrong. Think about that. If the only time people hear from leadership is when there is a problem, what message does that send? People begin associating leadership with criticism instead of support. That's a mistake. Recognition matters. People want to know their work matters. People want to know their effort is seen. People want to know somebody notices. Recognition builds confidence. Recognition builds trust. Recognition builds culture. Recognition builds teams. The best leaders I've worked for understood that, but there's another side to that lesson. Criticize softly. I've never believed in embarrassing people. I've never believed in humiliating people. I've never believed fear builds great organizations. Most people already know when they've made a mistake. Most people already know when they've fallen short. What they need isn't humiliation. What they need is coaching. They need guidance. They need support. They need a leader who helps them improve. I've seen leaders destroy trust in a matter of minutes because they chose public criticism instead of private coaching. I've seen talented employees shut down because they stopped feeling safe enough to learn. I've seen organizations create cultures where people became afraid because every mistake became a public event. That's not leadership, that's insecurity disguised as leadership. The strongest leaders I've ever known were secure enough to coach, secure enough to teach, secure enough to help people grow. They didn't need to prove they were in charge. Their leadership was obvious through their actions. The best leaders I've worked with all shared a few common traits. They set clear expectations, they followed up consistently, they inspected what they expected, they recognized success publicly, They corrected mistakes privately, and they genuinely cared about helping people succeed. That's not complicated, but it isn't always easy because leadership requires effort. Leadership requires consistency. Leadership requires discipline. Most importantly, leadership requires humility. The truth is that people rarely fail because they lack potential. More often, they fail because they lack clarity, they lack coaching, they lack support, they lack feedback. And those are leadership responsibilities. So after all these years, I still come back to those two simple lessons. Inspect what you expect, praise loudly, criticize softly. Simple ideas, powerful lessons. Lessons that apply whether you're leading a warehouse, a business, a project team, a department, or an entire organization. Because leadership is not about controlling people. Leadership is about helping people succeed. And that's a responsibility worth taking seriously. Subscribe for more real-world leadership, business, operations, and management lessons based on experience, not theory.